We will now present the 17 goals that will enable global progress on behalf of all people. And whenever we present each goal, we will illuminate on that goal and illuminate a brighter and more prosperous future.
End poverty in all its forms everywhere.
End hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture.
Ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages.
Ensure inclusive and quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all.
Achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls.
Ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all.
Ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all.
Promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all.
Build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation.
Reduce inequality within and among countries.
Make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable.
Ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns.
Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts.
Conserve and sustainably use the seas, use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development.
Protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss.
Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels.
Strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development.
Let's give a hand to those goals. Thank you. I'm Carolyn Barber, Congressional District Leader for One.org, as you can see on those t-shirts. One.org was started by Bono, the musician of U2, and we're committed to fighting extreme poverty and preventable disease, and primarily in Africa. We have about 7 million members around the world and 4 million in the United States. What's unique about One.org is that we don't accept donations, but what we do ask for is our members' voices. So when important issues or bills come before the US Congress, we ask our members to sign petitions online, we gather those, and then we deliver them in person to our members of Congress. We're really excited to be partnering with the UN Girl Up program this evening and all of these wonderful, talented students. It's such an honor to have you here. So I'd like to introduce Grace Wong.
Thank you. So we at Girl Up are really excited to be here. I am a national teen advisor for the campaign, and we are a United Nations Foundation campaign that is really here to promote adolescent girls. There's a void in international development for a long time on just focusing on girls' issues, and so this is what Girl Up does. We are for girls, by girls, but by girls and boys, of course. We're inclusive, and we're a campaign that fundraises, we advocate, and we also do awareness campaigns to better the lives of girls worldwide for education, health, and safety.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Heyn, and I have the great honor on behalf of the United Nations Association of Portland and the many co-sponsors of this evening's program to extend a very warm and hearty welcome to all of you, and really to say how genuinely we value your joining us here this evening. I want to thank One.org and the UN Girl Up program for that very nice, I would say, somewhat dramatic presentation of what we're trying to address today. That was great. I think that I can probably safely say that most of us are going to agree that in taking up these 17 sustainable goals, whoops, I hope that's not foretelling. I hope and believe that in taking these up, really the UN and the countries that we are serving are reaching out to a new kind of frontier, a new point of opportunity that is quite amazing, really. And I say that particularly because when we realize what's at the very core and heart of these challenges, which is, keep in mind, to end poverty in all its forms by the year 2030. Now, that sounds pretty daunting, and certainly it will be. But I think we can take a lot of, I would say, encouragement from what has gone on over the past 30, and particularly the last 15 years, when the UN established and agreed on the Millennial Development Goals that preceded the Sustainable Development Goals. And you probably know that many of those goals have been reached by many countries around the world, and even those countries which we weren't able to fully reach the goals and fell a bit short, great strides were made in that. Now, what are we talking about here? Let me give just a couple of quick examples. Maybe you already know, but during the past 30 and especially 15 years, the world has been able to cut more than half the extreme poverty all over the globe. Now, what do we mean by extreme poverty? Anyone living at $1.25 per day or less. Those are people living in extreme poverty. There used to be 2 billion. Now there are about 800 million. That's an enormous achievement. We have doubled the access to safe drinking water in that same period. We have cut in half, more than half, the child mortality around the world. We have almost cut in half the maternal mortality. These are huge achievements. We have been able to reach more than 90% of primary school enrollment, and the best news of that is that girls are now on an equal par with boys at that level of education. I want to, yeah, I think we should. If you will allow me, I'd like to just share with you a personal experience. I had the privilege of working for the UN in many of the poor countries around the world for the last 40 years, along with my wife, Suvira, who's sitting right here in the front. Many of the countries that we may be talking about, some of them we have served in. And I want to share with you one of those countries where we lived, and that was Malawi in southern Africa. That was from 1991 to 1995. Malawi was one of the poorest countries, not only in Africa, but all over the world. And at that time, it was under a tremendous suppression of a dictatorship by one Hastings Kumuzubanda. And the people suffered. You couldn't believe the conditions of the people at that time. Now, without going into a long story about it, let me tell you that the transition from that dictatorship to the democracy that Malawi enjoys today, even though it's a fledgling democracy, but it is one, was facilitated by the UN. And that opened up the beginning of a range of new opportunities that were never there, certainly under the dictatorship. To give you one example, they introduced for the first time in Malawi free universal primary education. They also achieved remarkable results. They didn't meet the goals, but they achieved a lot of results in child and maternal mortality. So whatever the challenges that remain, and they are big, they achieved a lot. And if we look now at what we're trying to do with these Sustainable Development Goals, the challenges are also really very enormous. Just to give you an idea of that, I mentioned earlier that we brought extreme poverty down from 2 billion to 800 million. Now we're going to get rid of the 800 million living in poverty. We're going to get rid of their poverty. But what you may not know is that we're going to work beyond that. We're going to target the people who are living just above extreme poverty. And those are people who are living at about $2 a day. And how many are they? Are there? About 2 billion, 2.2 billion. And we're going to do everything we can to significantly reduce that number. So these are amazing challenges we've set for ourselves, and think about the geographic scale of this. Many of the countries that have realized and achieved the goals of the Millennial Development Goal are rather a few. China and India stand out, and a lot of the statistics are based on those achievements. Now we are going to reach out far more broadly, and we will give maybe particular emphasis to Sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia. But also, we're going to have to do a lot in, unfortunately, too many growing number of countries who are in conflict because they are falling back into poverty. So these are the challenges, and we do feel that based on the achievements so far and the track record, that even though this is going to be very difficult, it can be feasible. And just one final note in welcoming you. I want to welcome you, of course, to this challenge and to joining this challenge, this opportunity for all of us. I feel that, of course, as all of us do, I'm sure, that all that I have said and that was shared with us is very pertinent, particularly to the poor and poorest countries around the world. But I feel very strongly, and I know many of the people of the UN do as well, that these challenges are equally relevant to the advanced countries, including our own. There is a challenge, particularly in the 17, to fight inequality. And we know that this is something that is very disturbing in many advanced countries, and including our own. And we need, I think, all to feel that we have this opportunity now, not only to support through good organization, advocacy, finding how to take action, both to support what's going on in these various countries, but also to work on it here at home. Thank you once again, and thank you for joining us.
Good evening. I'm Tim DuRoche. I'm the Director of Programs for the World Affairs Council of Oregon, and it's wonderful to see so many of you here tonight. Michael, that was wonderful. Thank you. Before I say much else, I want to thank Eric Vines and the World Forestry Center for playing host. I want to thank Kim Smith and the Greater Portland Sustainability Education Network for having a really good idea and running with it. I'd like to thank PCC and One.org, and of course the United Nations Association, that has been a wonderful partner of the World Affairs Councils probably since the very, very beginning. We are a 60-plus-year-old organization that has been concerned with all of these issues and how we share a planet that is shrinking and getting harder to sustain for many, many years. And we do about 60 public programs a year. We do conferences for educators and students. We have a robust visitor program that brings international visitors here to see what Portland does really well, including things like responsible forest management and good thinking around sustainability. So it's wonderful when we can bring all of our friends and line them up together and put on a shoe, as they like to say. I'm not going to talk too much about any. I usually do a lot of, we have this upcoming, we have that upcoming. We have two things upcoming, and I think that they're germane to the conversation tonight because they deal with responsible consumption and sustainable futures. The first is that November 4th, Robert Reich is going to be in town at the Old Church speaking, and if you don't have your ticket, I guarantee it will be sold out by the beginning of next week. So that's November 4th. And then the following day, we are partnering with PCC Cascades to do a No Boundaries, a high school travel and study abroad fair that will look at travel opportunities to over 30 countries and learn how young, diverse adventurers are shattering stereotypes of travel one passport stamp at a time. So you can go to our website, worldoregon.org, and learn more about these, but that program we're particularly excited about because it gives a lot of good ideas to people who might think that traveling and seeing and experiencing the world is not on their menu, and it definitely is. So that brings us to today. I'm going to introduce our panelists. They're going to talk, and then we'll ask a few questions, and then we will have a little bit of follow-up, and then we will go into a call to action, and then we will all raise our fists in revolution and fix this, shall we? Charles Hopkins is the UNESCO chair at York University in Toronto, Canada, where he teaches in the grad school. His UNESCO work focuses on the development and coordination of an international network of teacher education institutions from over 50 countries. He is co-director of the Sustainability and Education Academy, a nationwide institution located at York University that assists ministries of education, faculties of education, and school districts reorient and helps school districts reorient their school systems to address sustainability. Hopkins is also a United Nations University Advisor on Education for Sustainable Development, assisting UNU to develop regional centers of expertise in education for sustainable development around the globe. Charles, if you could come up here and have a seat, we'll kind of do you one by one. And we can applaud them all at the end. Kyoko Shiota works as a program associate for the Education for Sustainable Development program of United Nations University Institute for Advanced Study of Sustainability. That is such a mouthful. Supporting a variety of tasks for the regional centers of expertise on ESDs around the world. Before joining the United Nations University, she was working as a PR and advocacy officer for an international NGO for 6 years. She earned her MA from Teachers College, Columbia University, with a concentration in international educational development, and her BA from Tsuda College with a major in international relations. Kyoko, if you could come up here. Kim Smith, in addition to really helping this whole thing happen in a way that we were so pleasantly surprised and excited by. Kim Smith received her PhD in sociology from Indiana University in 2000. She is the coordinator of the Greater Portland Sustainability Education Network and has taught sociology at PCC since 1996, specializing in environmental sociology and social movements. She works closely with many nonprofits, including the Northwest Earth Institute and Hands on Greater Portland, where she served on the board for 6 years. She represented the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education at the United Nations Rio +20 Earth Summit and led the U.S. delegation to the UNESCO World Conference on ESD and serves on the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education's Board of Directors. Kim Smith. And Eric Vines is the executive director of the World Forestry Center. His past experience includes working at the Edward Lowe Foundation, helping mid-size business owners to help create jobs, the Sitka Center in support of artists, and the Gray Family Foundation to build a civically engaged society. His overriding goal is creating healthy organizations that can make our communities and personal lives better, which is a really darn fine goal. Thank you, Eric. Eric received his undergraduate degree in physics from Whitman College and his MBA from the University of Oregon. He has lived and worked in China, Philadelphia, Silicon Valley, North or Southwestern Michigan, and several locations in Oregon. Let's have Eric kind of come up and take a seat, and let's give them all a hand.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for coming out and being part of a global celebration of UN Day. Saturday is the actual date, but all around the world, starting yesterday and going through for probably the next 5 days, there are celebrations that are going on because the UN, 70 years old, almost as old as I am. In many of the cities around the world, buildings are lit up in blue and so on, and it's really quite a happy occasion. To think 70 years ago in San Francisco, about 35 countries gathered and agreed to form the United Nations. And that program has now grown to 193 countries around the world. It has many different arms and activities that are going on. It has the implementation programs such as UNDP and UNICEF and so on that one hears. It has specialized agencies such as UNESCO that we'll maybe talk a bit more about tonight. And the World Trade Organization, it has the Bretton Woods agencies and so on. And all of this that has accomplished so much operates on about $2.5 billion a year. It is amazing that that is the fees that countries pay. Now there are specialized donations that go in for particular peacekeeping or things of this nature. But it is a huge, huge bargain for what it is. Now, when the UN was first formed, it was largely to try and prevent a third world war. So much of the goals and so on that were there were to try and address that. Today, the challenges of World War, I mean, now it isn't so much countries as rogue groups and so on coming together, but we still now are faced with many, many challenges. The idea of providing for about 50% more people, doing that using less land, less water resources, and ecological security. The big one is going to be on the global energy supply. We've got to boost it at least 4 times, and it has to be carbon-free, and then replace our existing carbon-based energy. So these are the challenges. I hope the young people are still around and will feel that this will be an opportunity for them to really do things as well. So climate change, biodiversity, etc., and developing the skills to work collaboratively with one another and address these in particular goals. Now, in order to do that, there is a need for countries to work together. The old idea of no man is an island. Well, no country can really go it alone on their own. There has to be a forum where countries can meet and try to work in collaboration and to come up with vision. And hence, after 3 years of negotiations, very hard negotiations on the world we want, where civil society was able to enter into it through the internet and so on, we've been able to finally come up with these goals. But the whole idea is to how do we come up with what are the real needs of people, and then what are the goals, the content of addressing the needs, and coming up with a mechanism of actually trying to do it. Most of the work will be carried out by nations themselves. As I pointed out, the UN budget is roughly half an aircraft carrier per year. Yeah. The whole budget of UNESCO, I used to be the school superintendent in the city of Toronto. The whole UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural budget was about 1/2 of my budget in this city of Toronto. When you put things in perspective, you wonder, why can't we do more? Why can't we do more? And so the idea about the whole thing was that we need a unifying vision, and so hence in the mid-1980s, when we realized that simply focusing on environmental sustainability was not working. We had so many people, as Michael pointed out, in abject poverty. They needed development, and they could see through media how that 1 billion in the world lived. And so that really was the goal. And so there was a great tussle between the 80% of the world's population that wanted development and the 20% that were saying we need environmental protection, who already had much of the development. Yeah? And so the saw-off, the best that we could do in the negotiations was to come up with, okay, development, but let's make it sustainable. And so the definition of meeting the needs of the present without compromising future generations was brought forward as this great goal, the overarching one. Sometimes it's hard to try and figure out. I love the definition that came out of Africa by an elder. And indigenous people often have ways of saying things that are kind of nice. And his definition was enough for all, forever. It's just a beautiful way of phrasing it. It's been adapted now in the North, in the Scandinavian countries, where they think enough kind of sounds like stuff. It makes perfect sense in the developing world, but in the North, so they've changed it to well-being for all, forever. And because the idea came from an indigenous person, you understand that for all is not limited to humans. Right? So there's wisdom in the whole thing. So the idea with the sustainable development, and as I say, it was the best we could negotiate. We have to work through to something even better, because there are questions of sustaining what and for whom, and those things. But it's where we are now that the nations agreed to. So it's the idea of trying to balance our quest for environmental protection, economic well-being, and social well-being, all three of them. But it also has these kinds of emphasis in it. The idea of intergenerational responsibility. What gives my generation the right to have used roughly 50% of the world's known oil supplies? And so it's these are the things that we need to work at. Now, as well, the idea of where did we come from, of those roots that are still there, of trying to prevent war, the idea of really focusing on international peace and security, that really cannot go away. But it needs to be framed in a new light. The idea of the advancement of all. Now what we have to do is to be rethinking these original words and just leave it all and not necessarily people. Include people, but how do we move beyond that? And how do we look at the hope and the mission that is there? And these are the dreams that are coming forward now in a democratic way, negotiated and so on, and we have these goals. Now, the optimism. As Dr. Heyn pointed out, we have achieved a great deal. These are just a few. If we go down the list of what we've been able to achieve, there is so much more that needs being done. but we should be proud of what we have done. And it should inspire us to feel that, yes, we can. Yes, we can do it. There is that possibility of optimism. Right now, we have the agreement on the 17 new Sustainable Development Goals. That was huge negotiations. I was part of the negotiations for the 92, for the Earth Summit. And it was tough. Trying to, what country will give up? I'm not giving up unless they, and it was all this negotiating with one another. The beautiful thing is this time around, the problem in 1992 is right afterward, the funding didn't come forward. The South thought the North would bring some money, and it didn't happen. Now, about a month ago in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, the world's finance ministers agreed on funding, and it's about $3 trillion per year. Okay, that's the amount of money we threw in 2008 in order to rescue the banks. Think of that rescuing the world. It's amazing. So we have the funding. The corporate world is really aligning. There's story after story of how we're looking at building new economies that are built on sustainability. The carbon taxes and so on that are emerging and coming forward are forcing companies to look at new ways of sustainable production and consumption. The beautiful thing with higher education aligning, and from here I go to Minneapolis, as well as Dr. Smith is going. Higher education is looking at not only greening themselves, not only greening the campus, but greening the mind. What gets taught? Globally, about 3% of the world's population gets to go to higher education. But those three, they will become at least 80% of the shapers of the world, whether in the private sector, the public sector, faith-based groups, wherever. They will do it. And so it's so important as to the higher education accepting the responsibility. I'm not saying indoctrination, no, but truly educating, questioning. We need the philosophers, we need the social scientists as much as we need the engineering, mathematics, and so on. Yes, we need those as well. But this has to be a whole institutional approach, and so on. So, in closing, what we're going to do now is to try and bring this lofty global approach down into more concrete. We're going to look at one UN agency, one part, and is going to introduce you to a program at the United Nations University that has a huge footprint right here in Portland. So thank you very much for the opportunity of being here and being with you tonight. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to introduce United Nations University's initiative to promote education for sustainable development. My name is Kyoko Shiota, and I work for the Institute of the United Nations University, United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability. It is really a mouthful name. And I have been here in Portland since mid-August, and I spent 2 months here to see what was going on here in terms of sustainability activities. And I have to stress how much I was impressed with the activities I have been involved with through the work of Jepson. And I have to say, I was so impressed to see how many times I came across with the word of sustainability just by walking down the streets every day. And I was buying lunchbox, and even the lunchbox had a word on sustainability at the bottom of the box. And it was so amazing. And even sushi restaurant here cares about sustainable fish. That is not happening in Tokyo yet. And when I talk about sustainability issues, people get the meaning. And composts are everywhere. There are just many community gardens at various campuses, and people can talk about native plants here. And it has been a really wow experience for me. And I have never experienced this before, and I would really bring back what I have learned here back to Tokyo, as well as to the network expanded around the world, and so that people will have a chance to learn from your sustainability projects in Portland. So before going into detail, I would like to give you a little background about what UNU does. A simple, very simple explanation is that UNU is a research institute, a think tank for the United Nations organizations. So our mission is to contribute through collaborative research and education to resolve the pressing global problems of human survival, development, and welfare that are concern of the United Nations. And our main focus is to initiate evidence-based research that can be utilized at United Nations discussions. The headquarters is in Tokyo, and we have 13 institutes around 12 countries around the world. An institute for the advanced study of sustainability, which I work for, is one of the institutes for the UNU, and we are based in Tokyo as well, and we are focused on research and capacity development on sustainability issues. So from here, I would like to talk about what we do at the Institute to promote ESD. The ESD program at UNUIS was established in 2003 with the initiative of the government of Japan as a way to contribute to the United Nations Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, which is called DESD. And DESD was set from 2005 to 2014 with a focus on integrating sustainable development into education systems. And as a response to this initiative, ESD program was launched. And we are focusing on disseminating the concept of ESD through the promotion of regional centers of expertise, which is called RCEs, and strengthening ESD activities of higher education institutions and contributing evidence-based policy dialogue through research. And RCE is a multi-stakeholder network of individuals, organizations, institutions who are committed to using education, training, and public awareness to build a sustainable future. And the network can include stakeholders from formal, non-formal, and informal organizations. And it focuses on addressing local sustainability issues while linking it to with the global sustainability issues. And it is a regional center to search for sustainable development solutions at the local level, but we also think it is critical to share those solutions or challenges found through ESD activities in each region with other parts of the world. In other words, linking the local to the global. So we have been establishing RCEs around the world since 2005, and it started from 7 RCEs at first. But the network has been expanding rapidly, and we now have 138 RCEs around the world. And each year, the number is increasing. And we organize regional conferences in Africa, Asia Pacific, Americas, in Europe. And we also organize global RCE conference as well. And as you might have noticed, DSD has ended last year, but the commitment for ESD has been renewed at the World ESD conference held in Aichi last year to celebrate the end of DSD. And the new initiative is called Global Action Program on ESD, GAP, and the time frame was set from 2015 to 2020. And this will be further explained by Dr. Smith later. So I will not go into detail about this now, but our program will be fully committed to this GAP initiative by working together with RC members around the world. So as I have mentioned before, we have 138 RCs around the world. And as of today, we have 50 RCs in Asia Pacific, 39 in Europe, 29 in Africa, in the Middle East, and 20 in Americas. And in Americas, we have 1 in Argentina, 3 in Brazil, and 7 in Canada, 1 in Colombia, Mexico, Guatemala, and Peru, and 5 in USA. And we are hoping to establish more RCEs in the United States, as well as in Latin American countries. And RC Greater Portland, known as Gypsum, is considered as one of the leading RCEs around the world. And we think RC Greater Portland Gypsum can be one of the role models for other RC members. So this is the map of RCEs around the world at the moment. And you can see how many dots there are in the map. This also tells you through the work of Gypsum, you can be connected with these centers and with the people working on ESD around the world. So you do not really need to create a new network. You have the existing network around the world, and you just need to connect with Gypsum if you're interested in working on ESD. So after the DSD is over, what do we have as a post-2014 ESD agenda at the global level? As briefly mentioned before, Global Action Program in ESD was launched at the UNESCO World Conference on ESD in Japan in November 2014, and it was adopted by United Nations General Assembly in December 2014, and with a time frame of 2015 to 2020. And also, as a successor of Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals were adopted at the UN Sustainable Development Summit this September. It was agreed upon 193 countries. And there is a goal focused on education in Goal 4, and there is a specific target mentioning about ESD in point 4.7. And that will be also further elaborated by Dr. Smith later. But I believe ESD can contribute to many of the SDGs, and it has a great potential to contribute many of the development goals. So before finishing my presentation, I would like to pose 2 questions to everyone. While I was studying here for 2 months and being involved with ESD projects at Portland, I felt connection between the local with the global can be strengthened more. And this will be one of the homework that I will bring back to Tokyo, but would like to provide you with a chance to think about this by taking this opportunity. So what global and regional sustainability challenges do you see in Portland? And how can they be addressed, considering the role that SDGs and CAP can play? I would like you to take a moment to think about these questions as one individual while listening to 2 other presentations. So thank you very much for listening, and I would like to take this over to Dr. Smith.
So part of the session now is for us to really explore what are the Sustainable Development Goals. Thanks to all the wonderful youth who shared those, and really appreciate Carolyn for your choreography of that. Was very touching. You have before you some materials. We've got a lot of tables out as well, so after we finish up, we're going to continue to invite you to learn about the good work that's happening here. Kyoko mentioned Gypsum, as did Charles, and we are so grateful that the United Nations University recognized our region. We know, right? We know we do good work. They were just like, where have you guys been? Why didn't you join a decade ago? We didn't know about the UNU, and we didn't know about the RCEs, and kind of an American thing to do to not really have known about those kinds of things that were being offered by the UN. So, a little guilty. And so when I went to Rio Plus 20, which was a wonderful opportunity to learn about the role of education, we discovered this and came back and said, hey, to the colleges, to the local governments, to local nonprofits. What do you think? How would we benefit if we actually created a network and worked together and found some synergies and leveraged scarce resources, right? Got outside of our silos. And people said, yes, that is exactly what we need. We have wonderful models like the Intertwine Alliance that focus on conservation and wonderful parks and trails and all of that, a variety of different coalitions that already existed. But what would it look like if we really pulled together in this multi-sector model? You recognize the bridge? Yeah, right? Tilica, yeah. So that was a symbol. Amy Livingstone's here. She helped us with the logo as well, and thinking about what does that mean to build relationships, to bridge gaps, to really be a family and be interdependent together. So Gypsum is an RCE, our local name. Really, if you just say it backwards, that's our mission. Let's create a network where we use sustainability education to create a greater Portland. All right, and Greater Portland, that means regionally it's a 4-county network: Clark, Washington, Multnomah, and Clackamas. It's also an aspiration. Yeah, how can we create a Greater Portland? What kind of future do you want? What would it mean, right? What kind of Portland do you want? What kind of Greater Portland? What kind of Oregon? What kind of United States do you want? And so we're an E6 model, education, of course, being core, but environment, economy, equity in the traditional triple bottom line model of sustainable development. But we also really believe in empowerment and engagement. So it's so important, again, that the youth are here, but all of you. So my section really is an invitation for us to think about what we can do together. And so this is the new symbol, if you haven't seen this yet, that came out from with the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. And so if you'll see, we've added in, so we're saying we're an E6 model, the E's. Now you have some P's, right? 5 P's. And you might recall, do you remember when that people used to say people, planet, profit? Maybe you heard that, right? Notice it's now prosperity, because there are different kinds of economic models around the world. What does well-being mean, as you were saying, for Finland and the Scandinavian countries? And also partnership and peace. I mean, how many of you would actually like a future like that? That sounds pretty nice, right? You know? That sounds lovely. And, you know, it's something I just learned just a few months ago, and I just found it quite funny to think about it in this way. Martin Luther King did not say, "I have a nightmare." Right? Nor did he say, "I have a strategic plan." Those are not inspiring. They are not sexy. They do not create a vision for a future that we might want, right? Let's talk about objectives. Granted, we must have goals. Sustainable development goals are important, but we have to create a vision of a future that we want. And I want to be part of those conversations, and I want to meet good people like you, right? You wouldn't be here if you didn't think this mattered, and I hope it's worthwhile for you. So, you've seen the goals. Again, some of them have fallen, but that doesn't mean that they're weak. We just need stronger tape, right? But the 17 goals are important. I'm going to let, I know Eric is going to dig in a little deeper too in thinking about the forests and land issues, the number 15 in particular, 13 as well. We're going to focus specifically on education. So I'm going to dig in a little deeper on that one. But I want each of us to take just a moment, do a quick little exercise, right? So you've got your blue sheets in front of you. So you have the agenda. Yeah, you got the program. Flip it over. So a nice gift for you to take with you in case you were curious about all the things that the youth read. So just real quick show of hands. How many of you feel at least there's something in your life that you could do to help issues of poverty? Just show of hands real quick. That's actually pretty promising, right? Okay, how about issues of hunger? Perhaps you volunteered at the Oregon Food Bank before, right? There's a lot of things that one can do in that way. Good health and well-being? Perhaps even your own good health and well-being, right? Things that we can do. Quality education. Goodness gracious, look at now. You don't seem like hopeless, cynical people to me. That's a lot of hands. Okay, gender equality. Thank you. Appreciate that. Clean water and sanitation. They're doing good work around here. We're lucky to be living in a, in a state and in a region, in Washington as well, doing some work around this. Okay, let's look at the next group. Energy. You saw PGE has their table out there, right? Thank you very much for coming in. So we know we can do work around this. How about work and economic growth? Seems a little harder, right? Yeah, there's some issues around cost of living for sure, and livable wages in Oregon and Washington. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure. What do you think of that one? You think you can do something about it? Well, that could be transportation, right? Taking the bus, riding a bike. You just have to define what that is. So go in, look up the SDGs online. You can see the specific objectives. They seem very broad. As Michael said, they're very aspirational. Yeah, right? Throw in a carbon tax. There's different kinds of things we can think about. How about this number 10? How many of you feel like you can do something about that one? Okay, a little harder. Sustainable cities and communities? Right, this Portland, Green, there's tons of stuff around that. How about consumption and production? How many of you could be responsible consumers? Not so hard, right? Okay. And then climate action? It's important, essential, hard. How about life in the oceans and seas? You guys know about the tuna issues, right? Stop buying tuna. All right, that's one big one. All right, protecting life on land, definitely going to save that one for Eric, but just thinking about that, we were grateful to be here at the World Forestry Center. And but how many of you feel like you can do something about that? Okay, right? Plant a garden, it's its own thing. All right, how about peace, justice, and strong institutions? We can at least be kind to each other, right? Okay, that's a good thing. And then finally, strengthening partnerships for sustainable development. That's the invitation that a lot of our RCEs around the world and of course, again, Intertwine Alliance, and thank David for being here. Different groups around creating partnerships. Our own metro model is around that too. All right, so Kyoko mentioned number 4 specifically, so just education for sustainable development is 4.7. The goals, again, all have breakdowns in terms of specific things. So I want to just reiterate, this is not just, please don't think just schools. Okay, don't just think formal education or that, and then delegate that to a teacher or delegate that to a student. Every single one of you are educators. Every single one of you are learners, right? Lifelong learners. So what does that mean for us to increase our own public awareness, help increase outreach for others? What does that mean for us to increase our opportunities to have training, new skill sets, right? So education, formal education, yes, but adult education, non-formal education, and informal education with the media. So sharing the stories, getting the word out, giving hope that something is possible. And that's a big, big invitation with goal 4. So finally, I'm going to just wrap up here with the Global Action Program. The United States signed the Sustainable Development Goals. We signed a UN treaty. Woohoo! And we agreed to write a Global Action Program. If you're interested in that, please let us know, because Chuck and I have been working on that for the US. Reorienting existing education, yes, that's part of our goal. But making sure what exists is, why does education exist? Education for what? For a sustainable future, all right? And then helping increase training opportunities, empowerment for youth, but also a lot of train-the-trainer programs that you need to do. We don't have enough teachers trained to meet the demands of students in industry. So we got to grow that effort, okay? These are the 5 core priority action areas, and think about how you can align with these. How can we shape policy? Well, we can vote, right? Or you can lobby, whatever these are. How do you do whole institution approaches, whether that's changing your work practices, light bulbs matter, not enough, but changing our practices within our institutions. Again, building capacity, really, really need to get train-the-trainer models out there, empowering and mobilizing youth, specifically, intentionally inviting the youth, wanting so much. We're doing this for future generations, so much we need to have people have hope that it's possible to do something, and strengthening things right here. Sometimes the UN might feel like it's really big, or the problems are over there, or you can't do something. We're here tonight because we can. And it matters. We can do little things, and all of those things add up. So we're trying to document those stories, know what people are doing. So that's an invitation, again, to say what's happening, and how can we tell the world that we're doing this, rather than everybody thinking we're the bad guys, right? We're doing good stuff too, and we just have to tell those stories. All right, so these are the final things within GIPS and our goals, making sure that we aren't just doing scattershot types of goals. How can we align with initiatives? So working with the UNA and working with Human Rights Day coming up and things that we're saying, what are other folks doing and how can we collaborate? We don't want, when you work alone, it's hard and you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, right? Increase collective impact by actually developing partnerships. Collaborate. How many? We have 6, 7 co-sponsors tonight, right? Collaborating, sponsoring things together, doing trainings together. Everything you can do, tell the stories, get your events out on shared calendars, We have these networks that are available. These are all invitations. I'm saying these are all things that GIPSM's doing. So if you want to connect in or you need to find a way to get your story told, just connect in here, okay? The K-12 and college youth networks are really growing. Heather's here too with Portland State. Grateful for her work, and Breyer with Portland Community College. And then finally, civic engagement. I would have completely quit teaching years ago if I didn't, because I just felt like all I was doing was depressing my students. Teaching social problems, right? It's depressing. So, but when I started saying, wait a sec, let's do service learning, let's do applied learning, let's learn about these issues in the world itself and make a difference. So civic engagement's a really, really core part of our mission, and on the bookmarks out here, you'll see our slogan, educate, empower, engage. We don't want to just learn about issues, you want to feel like you can do something and you can figure out how, all right? And we want to help you do that. So thank you very much for your time. I'm going to mention 2 things for you to do research if you want to do some homework on this, you want to learn more about it. The Global Action Program, in addition to one supporting this work, we also have the world's largest lesson. I'm not going to play the video, right? I don't think we need to. You can watch this at any time. But there's curriculum all over the world. Resources, K-12, tons of stuff being developed, led by Sir Ken Robinson. I always want to say his name right. So this is, how are we going to save the world? It's got to be through education. And so they're saying it's the world's largest lesson. And 2015 is the year. The encyclical came out. We've got the GAP. We have the SDGs. And we know the Paris talks are coming up, right? The climate talks. So the other final thing is to get heard and counted. If you're doing anything around sustainability, all you have to do is go to this website, just put in SDGs and it'll pull up the partnerships. You can just put your initiative in. Just let people know what you're doing, whatever that might be. Pick your goal. All you guys were raising your hands, so that means you have something you're working on. Plug it in. They need the numbers, right? Numbers matter. All right, so that's our story. I'd like to hand it off to Eric, and he can share his story. Thank you.
So we're trying to save the world through forestry. And my job here today is to try and take this all the way down to the very practical, on the ground, what are we doing? So I wanted to give you a really interesting exercise that I experienced about a month ago. I went to the World Forestry Congress in South Africa, and a marketing guy was there, and he introduced this exercise, and I thought it was pretty fascinating, and it helped me kind of rethink about our work at the Forestry Center. So ask yourself, what is the enemy of Nike's success, right? And when I first kind of thought about this, the first thing that came to mind is, well, Adidas or Reebok or one of those other companies that makes tennis shoes. That's what Nike's they're fighting against. But his answer to that was not Adidas or Reebok. It was the enemy to Nike's success is apathy. Because if you don't get up off the couch, you're not going to buy any of the great stuff that Nike makes. What they're selling is the antidote to apathy. They're selling the inspiration to go out and do something, to just do it, to buy, and then you need tennis shoes, right, to just do it. Ask the same question about Apple. What's the enemy of Apple's success? And it's not Samsung, and it's not Microsoft. For me, what I think the enemy of Apple's success is contentment. Because as long as you're content with last year's phone, you're never going to buy the brand new phone. And so they're out there trying to make you just slightly discontent with that gadget that you have in your pocket. So then I started wondering, okay, well, what is the enemy then of our trying to create better sustainability in the world? And this is, I don't necessarily have the answer to it, but you can start to think of what are potential answers. Is it that it's too much, or not enough knowledge, or maybe apathy too? And as I was thinking about this in terms of forestry, like what's the enemy of the World Forestry Center trying to have people understand and be educated about forestry? Is it lack of knowledge, or is it just boredom? Because when I go to a lot of forestry conferences, what I hear are enormous numbers of statistics, because we're scientists, right? We talk in terms of hectares and millions of cubic acres or square miles or whatever it is, how much carbon is sequestered. And I think it sometimes just causes people to tune out and go to sleep. And so as we're doing our work, trying to understand how do we get people to actually engage in this, this is an interesting question. What is the enemy of our accomplishing this great work? And I don't necessarily have the answer, but maybe tonight that can be part of our discussion. So there's some interesting converging trends. In Africa, population is growing dramatically. There's an urgent need for more energy. So 80% of the fuel in Africa, see here's me using statistics in, 80% of the fuel in Africa is wood-based. It's charcoal, it's cutting down trees, they're using it for heating, they're using it for cooking, and the population is going to be growing dramatically. So the demand for wood in Africa is going to be huge over the next couple of decades. Now at the same time, with more people, there's a need for more food. And the best place that you get land in order to grow more food is where there's trees growing right now. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure to cut down forests that exist just to provide the food that people need. Similarly with water. So you've got these converging trends that also are compounded by the fact that as a society, as a world, we need to use less fossil fuels. And trees actually are one of the few places where you can substitute for anything that fossil fuels provide, you can get from trees. And so there's going to be a need to use trees in order to replace all the things that we get from fossil fuels right now. So these converging trends suggest there's going to be a lot of pressure on our forests, and we're going to have to figure out how to grow trees much more efficiently, much more effectively than we do now, because the world needs trees. How does forestry impact these sustainable development goals? Well, the most obvious one is 15, life on land, and it even mentions forestry in there. But when you really start to look at it, this is what's amazing about forests and forestry, is that it affects everything. It affects education. Where do your books, books are made from paper, which come from trees. Peace and justice. Wars are fought over resources. One of the reasons that the Forest Service was established was to try and protect the resources that the United States have in order to prevent future wars. So peace and justice are certainly in play. Gender equality, good health, and you could just keep going. There isn't a single one of these that isn't somehow touched by forests and forestry. It's an amazing integrating discipline. So here's quick stories. And hopefully these stories can help you see forests and forestry a little bit differently. In Bolivia and the highlands, there are farmers who have to make a very difficult choice, and that is how to feed their families. Now, they could do it by growing and harvesting trees, and they can do it sustainably, but we've created some really interesting challenges, and this all connects to global economics. In economics, you're like, I don't want to study economics, please don't make me study economics, but it's all connected to economics. So these Bolivian farmers have a choice of growing and harvesting trees in order to make flooring that we might buy in the United States or in Europe. But we don't want to hurt the forests in South Africa. So we've put in place laws and rules that say no buying of these trees. They're endangered, they're at risk, you can't buy trees in South America. So then what happens is they realize they can't make any money selling their trees, and so they clear cut them and turn it into a cattle plantation. So what we try to do in order to protect the forest sometimes creates the exact opposite of what we intend, and this happens quite a lot. In Portland recently, there was a great story of 3 redwood trees that were on a plot, and someone wanted to, cut them down and put a couple of houses in that plot. And a huge group of people got together, and they rallied and they raised money to protect those 3 redwood trees. It's an amazing story. They raised $800,000 to protect these 150-year-old trees, and they are beautiful trees. But those 3 trees, that $800,000, could have purchased 13,000 acres in the Amazon. So does that make sense on a global basis to have saved 3 trees, or should we have saved 13,000 trees? There's no right answer to that, but it's a really interesting question to ask. Now, could we have managed, to actually raise $800,000 to buy 13,000 acres, raise $800,000 to buy 13,000 acres in the Amazon? It's far away, it's distant, it's not so personal like those 3 trees are in Portland. But this is what we're talking about. As a species, trees in the Amazon clean the air just as well as the trees in Portland do. We have to think about this on a much bigger scale. We have to think, this is like World Forestry, that's what we do. We're thinking about this on a larger scale. In the South African sawmills, when I went on this tour, I was struck by the fact that most of the people who were in the sawmills, working the sawmills, were women. And in a sawmill in Oregon, about 6 people would work in the sawmill. In the African sawmill, they had 250. They purposefully did not buy the latest, greatest technology because they wanted to employ as many people as they could. And they're still producing the wood, and they're still creating a great product, and they're still serving their country, but they had a very different intention about how they went about it. Again, it's not better or wrong or different the way that we do it here or the way they do it there, but it is a choice, and it's a fascinating choice because it has such large implications. Why are palm oil plantations displacing native forests in Malaysia? Or Indonesia, doesn't matter, both places, it's happening on a rapid level. So we just had a conference here. We had 400 timberland investors come and talk about, who's owning the forest. We do this conference every year, and we have folks come from all over the world to talk about where forest ownership is happening. One of the slides that went up talked about the difference in value between native forests and some other uses for them. So in Indonesia and Malaysia, a native forest might have a value of about $3,000 per hectare. A hectare is just a little over twice as big as an acre. $3,000 per hectare. A palm oil plantation can deliver $20,000 per hectare. So you can increase the value of your land dramatically by cutting down that native forest and turning it into a palm oil plantation. In the Amazon, let me pull out the numbers here because I want to get this right. In the Amazon, similar values, $150 per hectare. $420 if you turn it into cattle grazing. So you make a lot more money turning into cattle. Now the reason for this is because we're not valuing all the stuff that native forest provides. We're not valuing the cleaning of the water. We're not valuing the cleaning of the air. We're not valuing the carbon that it's sequestering. None of that stuff gets calculated. And if we were able to value it, that means that we, who benefit from the clean water and the clean air, would have to figure out some way to pay for that benefit. And if we could figure that out, then suddenly those native forests become much more valuable and they become worth keeping. Tall wood buildings. So you're going to see this happening in Portland a lot. This is really cool. Architects and engineers have figured out ways to build buildings that are 30 stories tall out of solid wood. Now, on one hand, you might go, uh-oh, that means they're going to cut down a lot more trees to build those buildings. But think again about our Bolivian tree farmer. If there are markets for these trees, people have an incentive to grow them, to keep them as forests. They have value. In order to sequester carbon, something has to happen with a tree. A tree either shouldn't burn, and it shouldn't decompose. When a tree burns, it releases the carbon back to the atmosphere. When it decomposes, it releases the carbon back to the atmosphere. If you take a tree and you make it into a wood product and you put it in a building, and that building is standing for 100 or 200 years, as long as the building is standing, that carbon is sequestered. So we have the chance to actually build buildings 30 stories tall out of solid wood, sequestering that carbon and then replanting the forests where those trees came from. The extra benefit is that carbon and steel, which normally we build tall buildings with, are horribly carbon intensive. So this has a triple benefit of being environmental, creating buildings that are nice to live in, much more comfortable, energy efficient, and renewable. We can grow these trees back again. It's an amazing development, and the first building was just built in Portland this year, and there's 12 more that are in design coming up over the next couple of years. All right, how can you impact forestry? Cool things happening with community forests where local communities are working on buying the forests around their cities and learning how to manage those forests for multiple benefits: recreation, water, wood production, all the different things that forests provide. What's great about this is that communities then learn how hard it is to manage a forest. It is incredibly difficult and complex. And so this is a developing opportunity. It's happened more on the East Coast, but it's happening here. Nepal actually has a great history of community forests. We have a Nepalese fellow who's here at the Forestry Center right now. And so community forest development in the Northwest is something that we actually can get involved with owning and managing forests. What a great thing. Buying wood from sustainable sources. There's some great work being done in sustainability in certifying where do the trees come from. And if we pay a premium for that wood, it creates an incentive for those to go through the process of actually making sure that their forests are sustainably managed. Think about this from a big picture. You read a lot of stories about forestry in the news, but step back for a second and think about that indirect impact of that Bolivian tree farmer. We want that person to keep their forest as a forest, which means we need to buy some of their trees. We don't want them to cut them all down. We want them to continue to plant and regrow and keep that forest working as a forest. And finally, or almost finally, be skeptical of the extremes. It's not good to cut all the trees, and it's not good to necessarily keep all the trees. We have to use trees in order to get through this global crisis that we're facing. Forests are the thing that allows us to replace fossil fuels. They are amazing in what they provide. Our food products come from forests. I mean, when you start getting down to it, every single person on the planet benefits from forests existing. There isn't a single person that doesn't benefit. And so we have to be smart about how we use this resource, but we do need to use this resource. It's critically important because the other options are much worse. And finally, save a forest by using trees. Do it smart, and we can actually get through the next 150 years as a species.
So, how many of you know Gregory Bateson's name? He has a great line where he talks about the pattern that connects. And he says the pattern that connects the orchid to the primrose and the whale to the dolphin and all four to me. And this is a perfect illustration of that kind of thinking, which I love, which is knowing that forests cut across all of the SDGs, water supplies, helping mitigate climate change, providing billions of the world's poorest people with income, food, and medicine. It points toward this ecological way of looking at something. Is this approach, is this something new in terms of thinking about some of these issues?
Well, I don't know that it's new so much as we're talking about it more. I think that, often we think of ourselves, am I in the dark? Yeah. Often we think in terms of, with forestry, as just planting and growing trees. But we've done a terrible job of telling our story. In fact, my communications piece at the beginning is really about how do we tell this story better that connects with people, instead of just talking about how many cubic meters of carbon dioxide is sequestered. How do we tell this in a way that people can connect with and understand? And that's why I think the enemy of our ability to connect with people may be statistics or boredom or something along those lines. But I don't know that it's new. I just think we haven't talked about it very well.
Well, so here's and I want everyone to kind of jump in on this. what you pointed out in your presentation, all of these different places that we are looking at these things impacting one another. It's basically like this beautiful Venn diagram. What I worry about is promising action on climate while promising sustained economic growth, employment across the globe, while increasing access to energy at the same time. Does this mean that we may advance certain goals at the expense of others? It's a rugby scrum. Just jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, at first glance, one may think that's it, but that's where we need to be creative. We're not saying to reduce the economy. We're saying take the carbon out of it. And that may be create even more jobs and a better way of doing things. It's the idea of using 4.7 billion years of free research that is looking at nature in the design of buildings, in the design. For instance, the Japanese bullet train, the really fast one, the front of it is designed on a kingfisher's nose. Right? Because you could see how that kingfisher was able to plunge so much further into the water. Think of abalone shell. Abalone shell is one of the hardest materials, and yet it is made by an animal that doesn't move around. It takes elements out of the water and out of nutrients, creates that super hard material that itself is perfectly biodegradable and goes back. So we need to figure out ways of doing that. I love the story of the wood. Don't burn it, seal it up, and so on. So we'll learn our way forward. But the big thing that I think from your first question was that where a few scientists know it, the general public doesn't. And that's the role of education, public awareness, building understanding, training programs, and that's why I think that goal number 4, if you look at it in its breadth, that's where we will build knowledgeable communities that will vote for enlightened legislation, should it come along, and so on. I better stop at that. We're being recorded.
That's okay. From your accent, I think that you have a world leader named Justin now. So, so the SDGs, many people say, are unfeasibly expensive, and you said that there's funding committed or pledged. Looking at the Euro, I mean, this may get into sort of policy land a little bit, but looking at the Eurozone economic crisis, looking at political gridlock and dysfunction in our own country, and the generosity of all the OECD countries going down, is it reasonable to look at a $2 to $3 trillion a year prospect over 15 years?
Well, I think that we first want to say, is this too expensive? I think,
Do we have a choice?
We don't have a choice. It's much more expensive to go extinct, There's a variety of things to recognize in terms of what are our true costs. So I appreciated what you're talking about with true cost accounting. Again, if $3 trillion is half of an aircraft carrier, it's not so expensive. It's just putting that in perspective. How much money do we spend on cosmetics and perfume and dog food in Europe and ice cream, and there's many, many things. And when you put the numbers actually in those are in different types of ways of framing it, these are priceless goals. We have to actually just identify and frame it. Put some skin in the game and understand this. One of the biggest things that I'm very embarrassed by, and I'll put this obvious on film. I don't mind. Hello, thank you PCC for filming all of this. The United States stopped paying our bills to UNESCO in 2011. We haven't paid our fees, which were $80 million, over a quarter of UNESCO's bills since 2011. We lost our right to vote. We're not a voting member of UNESCO. We lost that in 2014. These are things that, are embarrassing. Like, these are things that we need to recognize that our voice matters. We do good things. Our international reputation has been hurt by that. So recognizing how we can contribute, it's invaluable.
So it's both public education and engagement as well as bolstering civic and political will.
Yeah.
I'd just make one other comment, that I think that we can grow the economy, 3 trillion, by addressing these issues. It's not as though we give the money away. If we work in our own country, I'll use my own tax base, coming out of Canada, every time the government spends the money in Canada to Canadians to fix things, they get 40% of it back through taxes. It's not as though we're buying something from yet another country where the money goes or to and so on. There is a flow back. And I think we need to be creative in trying to figure out how are we going to do this so that that money is not only a savings, but it generates new employment, better employment. The thing we really have to look at is how are we going to employ the next generations. I love that idea of the sawmill employing more. I came upon the same thing with the charcoal factory, with people saying, we could do it much more efficiently. But what would these people do in the community? Yeah. Sorry.
I believe, Grace, are you here somewhere with a microphone? Do we have any questions out of the audience? I have a couple more for them before we move on, but I figure we should pretend it's the UN and give you all a chance to talk, too. Grace, we've got someone right down here with their hand held high and proud.
Hi, thanks. I'm wondering if, this is relating to the forestry issue, in the process of trying to relate buyers and growers of forest products, are we as a world getting any smarter about growing forest products without having monocultures and with including natural systems that are biodiverse?
Sure. So for me, I didn't come into this as a forester, so I've had a lot of learning that I've done. And one of the things that's been fascinating to me is that foresters are, they're agnostic in some ways. A forester can give you whatever kind of forest you want. Do you want a mixed age, mixed stand forest? They can tell you how to create that. You want a monoculture forest that's just designed to grow Douglas fir as fast as possible? They can give you that. You want a forest that is entirely designed to make paper? They can give you that. For biodiversity, whatever forest you want. And in fact, every forest in the world at this point is a managed forest. Even ones that we choose not to cut, wherever they happen to be. We as a species so dominate this planet, there isn't a single forest anywhere that isn't, in some ways, a managed forest. So you can actually create forests in all those different ways, and it's really what's your economic incentive to do so for one versus the other. There recently was a story about, I don't remember if it was Sweden or Finland, I'm sorry to anyone who's Swedish or Finnish that I confuse your countries, but that they transferred $1 billion to the Brazilians to help them preserve some of the forests in Brazil and the Amazon. So there's an economic incentive on the part of European countries to try and help native forests in other countries, and they're willing to invest their money to make that happen. So it is happening, and again, there's just lots of different ways that you can manage a forest. One, again, isn't necessarily worse than the other. It's what are you trying to accomplish? That's the ultimate question. We may not like to look at single species forests as we drive through the Pacific Northwest, and yet we benefit from those wildly. We actually are growing more trees in Oregon than we're cutting right now. It doesn't always look like that, but we are. And so when you look on a global basis, the United States is doing a fairly good job of managing its forests for the long term, but that is not the case always in other countries. And in some ways, we have exported our problem to other places by getting someone else to cut their trees and ship them to us. So we don't have to look at the clear cuts. The clear cuts are happening in those other places around the world, and that's not fair. That's not that's not social justice. So we have to be taking responsibility for our own forests, and we also have to think about our buying habits that are affecting those other forests.
There was somebody over here.
Thank you. 2 days ago, I saw the movie This Changes Everything. And one of the things that I got out of that concept, and I recommend that everybody see it if they can, is the concept that we have to think about what is the best thing. You mentioned that. Making money is not enough. You need to think about things in a much larger perspective, and maybe saving the planet comes before economy. I was listening to someone who wants to support some major industrial thing in Vancouver. The only thing she talked about was money. It's not enough anymore. And so that movie talks a lot about the fact that that is sort of an ancient or old-fashioned concept that we are in control of everything and the masters of everything, and money is the only issue. I think you talked about having to have a bigger picture about what you're getting. And I think that's something valuable to think about.
You know, interestingly, I think one of the criticisms of the development goals has been that development and the poverty reduction relies on old models of industrial growth. And I've seen this in a couple different places, and it kind of gets at what you're getting at. And I'm just kind of curious if how much discussion you've heard around these criticisms. And then we'll jump to your question. Sorry.
Well, I think I addressed it a little bit before when I said, yeah, we do need to employ the millions of young people that are still coming in. Although population rates are coming down, India still needs to provide employment for roughly 40 million young people per year. That's the job rate that they have to create. Otherwise, you saw what happened in the Arab Spring, right? Where you had huge numbers of young people that are unemployed. So we do need to somehow create employment, we need to create jobs and so on. But what kind of decent work? And how do we go about doing that? That's where we really need the creativity. And as this lady pointed out, this is where we need to bring in the philosophers. You know, what is the meaning of life? What is the good life? What is well-being? And we need to rethink, for instance, a $60 million yacht being sold, that adds $60 million to the GDP. A $60 million Van Gogh painting being sold adds $60 million to the nation's GDP. But look at the ecological footprint of one versus the other. The most treasured thing with indigenous people was often their family story. What is the ecological footprint of a family story? You know? So we just need to be able to question the very goals. What is the purpose? What are we trying to do? And that, as I say, not indoctrination, but creatively going back and seeing what even is the purpose of our education systems. Okay?
And recognizing that the GDP does not measure a healthy society. If you haven't, it was so hard to get tickets to that movie, by the way, but the book is fabulous and I'm in the process of reading it right now. And for sure, the economic measurements, you know, do we measure a healthy society? What are the true indicators? So thinking about the gross national happiness, right? There's all kinds of new, different economic models that we are looking at, and certainly those are revolutionary things to actually change economic systems. But the old system has led us into a serious crisis. So we have to come up with new models and new ways of measuring health and justice. Thank you.
And success.
And success. You're right. Success. Let's redefine all of those kinds of things.
And this young lady's got the microphone, and then we will pass it on.
Just a simple, quick question. Where's the 30-story solid wood building in Portland?
Oh, it's not 30-story in Portland yet. The 30-story is the architects say that they can build one that's 30 stories. The one in Portland's, I think the first one is 4, and they're building one that's 9 next year. One is just off of Burnside. It was done by Lever Architects. I have to look up the address, but you'll start seeing, if you look for cross-laminated timber, you'll start seeing stories about this all over the place.
Gentleman back here had
Kim Smith mentioned the term save our planet or save our world. Would you speak somehow, to a description of what you imagine a saved world would look like?
I'm taking a moment just to see. I know it's getting late. I'm checking things. I don't know. And some of you can't see us when we're sitting down. Is that true? Is that an issue? Okay. We should be standing up as we're talking too then, in terms of lighting. What is a saved? Well, that's a big question, isn't it? I mean, that's the negotiations of all the countries saying, what are those 17 goals, right? I mean, in many ways. Does it mean having an equal world? Does it mean, having a prosperous world where we don't have poverty? Is it healthy? It's an opportunity. I really love that Finland has taken on a process, and I know Chuck has talked about this, with a full countrywide survey. What kind of Finland do they want, right? And well-being is the phrase they're using. So what does that mean for us to say, what is the future you want? I can't necessarily answer that, but I can certainly, say that I would, a livable, when we talk about livability, is that your goal? To live? Well, that's a minimum. Right? I mean, the language matters. Sustainability. I sometimes think about this, many of you are in relationships. When somebody asks you, how's your relationship going? Do you say, it's sustaining. It's getting by. That's not my goal. So it's like, what does it mean to thrive? What does it mean to prosper? What does it mean to be happy? What does it mean to be joyful? What does it mean to live in partnership and kindness and that's for me, the answers for myself, but each of us has to really explore that in our own heart and our own psyches. Microphone.
What might be something we have in common, although we vary, as you described just now, and in our specific appetites? What might the thing we would have in common if the world were saved?
I'm going to ask you to answer the question. Yeah, that was a total teacher move, I know.
It is a bit personal, of course, but I think the ideal that I would seek can't be described in millimeters and yards, but it can be described by saying it would be a circumstance in which people generally were happy, and adults had the experience of seeing themselves behave in a manner that contributed to the well-being of the community of which they were a part. And I think that would be the circumstance that would make the Earth's surviving, or the human genome survival, worth it to me.
Could I suggest one thing? And for myself, I would also add in love, whatever love looks like. Could you just turn to your partner, somebody sitting next to you really, really fast, and say what that word might be? What would that one thing be that you think we actually share in common? Just take a moment. And we're...
I'm going to ask you one more. Yeah, then I'm going to... Okay. While you guys are talking amongst yourselves, I want to ask our esteemed folks here, 17 goals, 169 proposed indicators. If the four of you were charged right now with setting down these goals, is there anything that you would have done differently, or maybe put more weight behind, or was there something left out? If you guys were in charge of the zoo, of these 17 beautiful aspirational goals, what might you have done differently?
I think, as this gentleman pointed out, I would have tried to spend a little bit more time on articulating the vision of what would a sustainable future look like. The reason is it looks so different in different cultures all around the world. But at this point, we're largely identifying what is unsustainable and moving away from it. You know, it's like we're driving, looking in the rear view mirror. We're backing away for things. And so it makes it so very, very difficult to come up with the inspirational, this is what we want, and get the marketing and get the language right and so on. But I think we've got enough on our plate with what we've got here.
Why don't you click to the slide and just your slide? Do you have a clicker?
No.
Oh, he's got it.
Okay. You click to the next slide and you can...
So I think what we're doing right now is we are moving forward, and we're getting to the part of the program where we consider, you know, how can everyday citizens recognize that everyday well-being is tied to all of these resource challenges, and what the heck can we do about it? So I think, Charles, you're gonna say a few things, and then we're gonna...
Yeah, I wanted to share this. When I walked in and I saw the handprint, this is such a beautiful story. I think all of you know the concept of the ecological footprint. Right? Came from just up the road here at University of British Columbia, Professor Bill Rees and so on. Well, 4 years ago in Hyderabad, a teacher was teaching the ecological footprint, and she had one balloon for the Earth and another small balloon for the 1 1/4 Earths that we are using our natural resources at, and 4 more balloons. This is the number of Earths, planets we would need if everyone lives like they do in North America and so on. And a little girl in grade 4 said, "But I have hands. I can do something about my footprint." And the teacher recognized the imagery. Now, how many times have little kids drawn hands, right? But she put paint on and the kids hold it, and then she went to the largest environmental education network in India called the Center for Environmental Education. And they saw the concept of the ecological handprint as the positive component of what we can do. And they went to the Ministry of Environment in India, and that concept is sweeping through Africa and around the world. The idea that, fine, you can have a PhD, a professor at UBC coming up with the ecological footprint, but you can also have a little child, grade 4, coming up with an equally powerful idea. But that idea wouldn't have gone anywhere if it had not been for the teacher, the NGO working with it, the government. And so it's that goal 17, where are we, of partnering, networking, working together, and doing something and building it forward. But I was so overwhelmed with the concept of that. And so I wish that all of us will go through life and we'll be known for our handprints rather than our footprints.
And I recognize there are many more questions, and Tim, thank you for moderating those, and it's hard because there's so many people. And we'll hang out and we'll talk. I mean, again, we have 2 actions coming up here. And so, again, ways to get involved. It's often these kinds of events when we say, what can we do differently? That's one of the things I think that's fair, is like a lot of these are about what are we doing wrong and not what we're doing right. And Chuck, you know, he travels a lot. He has to go to all the different, he actually travels 300 days a year. So you know, that guy's got a carbon footprint, right? So anyway, one of the things that we just wanted to end with in terms of thinking about these kinds of questions, what is it that we're doing within our own lives? Please don't take the weight of the world on your shoulders. Where none of us are perfect. And so going back to the idea of when I was saying that Chuck travels 300 days a year working with governments to try to shape policies and shape education ministries, but he has to say, is this trip, is my handprint bigger than my footprint, right? And those things that we have to make those compromises within ourselves, and it's hard because we can't be perfect, but we can be better. So whether that means learning about the issues, taking actions in your own homes, participate in the Eco Challenge with Northwest Earth Institute right now. There's lots of things that people can do. Volunteering, being part of organizations, knowing as a consumer you have power with your dollar, right? Whatever you can do to shape policies. Use your power, use your voice. And then please, please, at least smile and be kind to each other. They're simple kinds of things, but those are foundation issues, right, that reach these goals. So that's part of the question about taking actions, and I hope that, that you see yourself in these goals. They're not out there, they're in us. So Grace has an activity for us that Carolyn and Grace have suggested, and so we want to just go forward with that.
Okay, so how many of you have these lovely things that we were just talking about? iPhones in your pockets, or Androids, or smartphones, and have a Twitter? Hopefully some of you. If not, what we are doing is we are doing a UN Day call to action. So we want you to tweet in support of these global goals, because while you guys are all super awesome to come out and learn about these goals and talk about sustainable development, there's still a lot of people who maybe don't know about sustainable development, why it's important, and these amazing panelists have obviously given us reasons to understand why sustainable development is so important. And so these are some sample tweets. So at UN, we've come together to hashtag light the way for the hashtag global goals. Hashtag global goals is the hashtag that we will be using for the UN birthday and to celebrate the SDGs. And then at UN, Portland is celebrating the new hashtag global goals as we hashtag light the way to a better future for all. Also, feel free to be innovative, create your own. It's really important we get the word out there about sustainable development, because while we are one voice, we are so much better together, and just getting your networks all working towards sustainable development. Thank you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, United Nations. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you all. If you've got questions for any of the panelists, I'm sure they would love to entertain them. There's going to be more networking. There's snacks. There's a whole world of opportunity in front of you. And to let Voltaire have the last word, does anyone know the last line of Candide? Il faut cultiver notre jardin. We must cultivate our gardens. So that's my parting thought for you all.